So I'm going to read this story about an NHS pharmacist called John Cross, who had the COVID jab and then suffered with paralysis. I'm not going to read the headline or the first paragraph just because I'm not actually sure that I'm allowed to say that on YouTube, and so I won't read the first two parts, but I will read the rest. John Cross was told by the official medical assessor for the government's vaccine damage payment scheme that the COVID vaccine had caused his rare neurological effects, but he wasn't disabled enough for a payment. The Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme was set up in 1979 to make one-off payments of £120,000 to people who have suffered rare but significant side effects to various vaccines. Mr. Cross was a strong supporter of vaccination. Here he is, here's a picture of him. He was a strong supporter of vaccination and was eager to get his jab. Why? To protect vulnerable and elderly relatives. So this is another person who took a very powerful medicine, not for his own benefit, but for the benefit of other people. But 2 weeks after his first dose, he began to suffer from progressive paralysis that travelled through his body. How sad. He was unable to move, unable to blink, and unable to breathe, and was admitted to intensive care where he was given a breathing tube in his neck and nursing staff had to tape his eyes closed so that he could sleep. So that's not disabled enough, guys, okay? Not disabled enough for any compensation, even though he has worked for the NHS all his life. Now, doctors eventually diagnosed Mr. Cross with chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, swelling of the nerves that leads to a loss of strength and sensation, and he relapsed several times. Now, here's a picture of poor John. So after 7 months in hospital recovering, he slowly learned to eat, walk and talk again, but his mobility and fitness never returned to the level it was before he got sick. He was left with chronic pain and numbness and relapsed several times. Doctors urged Mr. Cross to submit a claim to the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, but after 2 years of delays, only one review of his medical records and no face-to-face assessment, his claim was rejected. So even though the doctors thought he would stand a good chance of getting some kind of compensation, the government thought otherwise. His widow, Christine, told Sky News nobody spoke to him, there was no personal contact, nothing, just fill in this form and that was it. I'm very angry. John went through enough with the illness and the recovery without going through the trauma of this bureaucracy. So his mental health began declining shortly after the rejection. Okay? I'm not going to read the rest of that paragraph just because I don't think I'm allowed to. Mr. Cross's eldest son, Adam, said his father dreaded the intense dialysis-like treatment to remove rogue antibodies from his blood because it left him extremely fatigued for days after. Mr. Cross had begun gathering medical evidence to have the judgment overturned. Okay, I'll leave that one there as well. His family told Sky News that they are going to try to have the judgment overturned and are calling for urgent reform to the government's vaccine damage payment scheme. Now, I'm going to just jump down here, although what do the kids say? The kids say you look at everything and it's just wrong. It's unjust. I was very surprised by the next paragraph. His daughter, Liz Whitehead, said, we've all had our vaccinations and we continue to since we've lost Dad. That really surprised me. But she asks, but now you start to question, if a rare, unusual thing were to take place, as happened in several other cases, the system's not got your back. It's not there for you. Is it worth the risk? Very good question. Is it worth the risk? Now, one more interesting statistic just down here. Mr. Todd is a solicitor. He's the family's solicitor. It's like a lawyer, and he wants to have the judgment overturned. He has tracked the number of applications sent to the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. Before the pandemic, there were a few dozen. Remember, a dozen is 12. We saw that in a recent class. A dozen means 12. So there were maybe 20, 30 each year applications for from people who had adverse reactions to vaccines, but 14,000 people have made claims since the COVID vaccine rollout in late 2020. Okay, so far more in the last few years for some odd reason. And that's according to the Freedom of Information request submitted by Mr. Todd to the NHS.